Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind, and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into one of the most quietly fascinating questions of modern thought, a question that lives in the pause before a decision, in the afterglow of a strange dream, and in the eerie stillness of déjà vu. It's the possibility that perhaps, in this very moment, you are not just living one life, but a part of something larger, more intricate, a great unfolding of parallel versions of yourself, each walking softly along a path shaped by choices you almost made. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the quiet wonder of parallel lives together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. There are moments that seem to slip through the cracks of time. A hallway you swear you've walked before, though your feet know better. A conversation you haven't had, but somehow remember. The sudden weight of a choice you didn't make, echoing quietly across the years like a question that never found its voice. These moments don't arrive with certainty, only with suggestion. A gentle tug in the chest, a slowing of breath, a brief confusion that feels more like memory than mistake. You've likely brushed against these feelings before, perhaps while waking from a dream that didn't quite fade, or while standing at a crossroads in life, wondering, not what to choose, but what might already have been chosen somewhere else. These sensations are easy to dismiss. We're taught to believe the world is singular, that reality moves in a single line, one moment stacked neatly atop the last. But some ideas, both ancient and astonishingly modern, ask us to consider something softer, stranger, and perhaps even more comforting. What if every time you made a decision, reality didn't simply choose one outcome and discard the rest? What if it kept going? All of it, every possibility, every version of the story, each one continuing in its own quiet universe, like branches spreading from the same tree. Not just in theory, not just as metaphor, but as something real, something unfolding now. We'll explore this gently tonight, not through complicated equations or tangled theories, but through the rhythm of feeling, thought, and quiet imagination. We'll touch lightly on what science suggests, that quantum choices may not collapse but multiply, and that you, as the observer, might be far more than a witness. You might be the branch itself, not just walking one path, but brushing softly against the echoes of all the others you could have walked. So as you listen, I invite you not to analyze or memorize, but simply to rest in the idea, the soft possibility that you are not alone in your becoming. That there may be many versions of you, all doing their best, all shaped by a moment of courage or silence, by a word spoken or a step delayed. And maybe, just maybe, the pull you sometimes feel towards something you cannot name is the memory of a life still happening, just beside this one. This won't be a story of urgency. It isn't meant to resolve anything. It's a drift, a wandering, a slow unfolding of thought and feeling across the landscapes of identity and possibility. We'll begin with sensations you already know, déjà vu, emotional echoes, the strange logic of dreams, and then move gently outward into the science of quantum decisions, the branching of selves, and the poetic idea that who you are might always have been a chorus. And if you fall asleep somewhere along the way, that's perfectly all right. That's what we're here for. Let your thoughts float where they will, and let the story carry on without you. You can always return. These words will be waiting like footprints in soft sand. Never quite the same the second time, but still pointing towards something real. So take a slow breath, and as you exhale, imagine a version of you. Not far away, not alien, just gently different, listening to in a parallel night, in a parallel stillness, under the same quiet sky. Let's begin. There's a moment, small, quiet, and easily overlooked, that sometimes arrives while you're walking through a place you've never been before. The hallway stretches ahead, unfamiliar in every way. Unfamiliar walls, unfamiliar light, unfamiliar footsteps echoing somewhere just out of view. And yet, something about it feels known. Not completely, not clearly, but just enough to stop you in your tracks. You hesitate, blinking slowly, eyes drifting across the pattern of tiles on the floor or the soft flicker of a light bulb overhead, and a thought brushes past your mind before you can catch it. I've been here before, haven't I? Except you haven't. Not in any way you can explain. This is the feeling of déjà vu. Not a sharp recollection, but something softer, like memory filtered through a dream, or a half-remembered melody playing just beneath the noise of waking life. It comes without warning, fades without ceremony, and leaves behind a gentle unease. Not unpleasant, just strange, as if the air itself had briefly folded in on itself and then moved on. And though we often laugh it off, this sensation touches something deeper than a passing glitch in your brain. Because sometimes, even after the moment has passed, there's a lingering sense, a quiet certainty that this isn't the first time that you've lived this sliver of experience before or beside or in the soft space just behind this moment. Then there are dreams, not the wild, chaotic ones that scatter like birds the moment you wake, but the ones that settle in your chest and refuse to leave. You might find yourself walking through a city you've never known, but somehow navigate with ease, or speaking fluently with a stranger whose face you're certain you've seen before. And when you wake, the dream dissolves, but not entirely. The emotional imprint remains, that strange lingering ache of familiarity, of belonging to something that never quite happened. Where do these sensations come from? These emotional echoes of lives unremembered? Maybe they're nothing. Maybe they're tricks of the brain, fragments of thought caught in loops or rewired memories surfacing in unexpected ways. That's the explanation we're most often given, comforting in its simplicity, logical in its clarity. But there's another possibility, one that asks us not for proof, but for patience, not for certainty, but for curiosity. What if these moments are not errors, but glimpses? What if, when you feel like you've been here before, or when you dream of a life you've never lived, you're not remembering the past or imagining the future, but gently brushing against the edges of a reality where things happened just a little differently? Not dramatically so, not another you in a distant galaxy or leading a life unrecognizable from your own. No, something closer, softer. Another version of you who made a slightly different choice, took the job, said yes instead of no, turned left instead of right. And what if that other self is still out there? Not metaphorically, not in imagination, but in a real, parallel unfolding of reality, continuing down that other road you didn't take. This isn't the stuff of science fiction, with dramatic portals and loud special effects. This is something quieter, more intimate, a theory that suggests every decision, every hesitation, every turning point doesn't erase the other possibilities. It simply allows them to continue without you. The you who didn't move away, the you who forgave, the you who stayed, not gone, not deleted, simply walking another branch. There's a kind of theory in physics, we'll explore it more fully in time, that proposes the universe doesn't just pick one version of events and discard the rest. Instead, it holds on to every outcome, each one gently splitting off like branches from the same tree. Every time you make a choice, there is not just one reality that unfolds, but many, each one shaped by the decisions taken or left behind. And maybe, just maybe, when you feel that odd flicker of familiarity, that pause, that whisper of "I've been here before," what you're really sensing is not memory at all, it's presence, a brush of awareness from another version of you. Not a ghost, not a vision, but something quieter still. The nearness of another self, walking a path only a breath apart from yours. Of course, we don't know for sure. These are only ideas, soft sketches drawn in the space between physics and philosophy. And yet, they offer a kind of gentle wonder that logic alone can't fully explain. Because if it's true, if the lives we didn't live still ripple outward in distant branches, then nothing is truly lost. The versions of you who chose differently, who dreamed differently, who became someone else entirely, they're not gone. They're still walking, still unfolding. And you, the you listening now, are one among many. Unique not in being the only one, but in being this one. You don't need to find them. You don't need to prove their existence. You only need to pause, to notice, to wonder. And maybe that's all déjà vu ever was. Not a glitch, but a greeting. Not confusion, but quiet recognition. So the next time you find yourself in a place that feels like memory but isn't, or the next time you wake from a dream that lingers longer than it should, consider this. Maybe you've just glimpsed a version of yourself, not in a mirror, but in a story still being written, just out of sight. And maybe, just maybe, that story remembers you too. To understand where these ideas begin, these quiet branches of being and becoming, we need to pause, just for a moment, at the edge of something stranger than fiction, and somehow more ordinary than we expect, the physics of choice. Now, when most people hear quantum physics, their minds leap to glowing particles, teleporting cats, and chalkboards filled with symbols that might as well be spells. But underneath all the noise and misinterpretations, quantum physics is not a science of chaos. It is a science of unfolding possibility, and at the heart of it lies a gentle, almost poetic idea. Until something is observed, it exists in a kind of shimmering maybe. Imagine a coin, not just spinning in the air but hanging there, neither heads nor tails, both at once suspended in potential. Not because we don't know what it is yet, but because in that quantum space, it truly hasn't become either. It's not just unknown, it is undecided. Only when you look, only when you truly observe, does it land. This idea, this strange and foundational truth, is what physicists call superposition. A particle can be in many states at once. A decision can hover across multiple outcomes. A life can balance on the cusp of yes and no, until something collapses the question into an answer. But here's the twist, and it's one that has left generations of scientists and philosophers staring quietly at the floor, in wonder or in discomfort. What if observation doesn't collapse the wave of possibility? What if, instead of choosing one path and discarding the rest, the universe, without drama or noise, simply allows all outcomes to unfold? That's the essence of the many worlds interpretation. It proposes that every time a quantum choice is made, no matter how small, reality splits, silently and completely. In one thread of the cosmos, the coin lands heads. In another, it lands tails, and both are equally real. Now imagine this same structure, not with coins or particles, but with choices in a life, in your life. What to say, whom to love, whether to stay, whether to leave. Each decision a fork, not of potential but of action. Quantum decision theory takes this further, bringing the strange indeterminacy of quantum mechanics into the realm of choice, belief, and behaviour. It suggests that your mind, your awareness, is not merely a selector of one future, but something far more fluid. Perhaps in moments of choice, you don't so much eliminate possibilities as let them echo outward. The decision you didn't make, the sentence you almost said but swallowed, they might still exist, quietly flowering along an alternate path, but before you worry, this isn't meant to overwhelm. These aren't meant to be burdens, these are simply possibilities. In this model of the universe, you don't lose the lives you didn't live. You simply walk one of many roads, while the others stretch alongside you like paths through a forest you chose not to enter. And the beauty of it is that your steps are still yours. Every breath, every hesitation, every half-formed hope, they belong to you. Even if other versions of you exist, they don't diminish your own being. They only deepen it. And here is where the physics meets something more personal. In classical thought, we like to believe that reality is fixed, that it unfolds according to rules, cause and effect, action and consequence. But quantum theory shows us something more mysterious, that reality may be fundamentally participatory, that what we observe shapes what is, and what we decide defines what becomes. You're not just walking through the world, you're helping write it. But this writing doesn't happen with pen and paper, it happens with perception, with intention, with the simple act of choosing again and again to exist, to act, to feel, to care. Of course, you don't feel the moment the world branches. You don't hear a sound when the coin lands both ways in two universes. You don't see a mirror shatter and reform in every direction each time you choose kindness over silence, or bravery over doubt. But perhaps you do feel it, not with your eyes or your ears, but somewhere quieter, somewhere deep in the folds of your memory, in the warmth of a familiar path not taken, in the soft ache of what might have been, still echoing faintly just beyond your reach. Quantum decision theory doesn't tell you that your choices are meaningless because all outcomes exist. It tells you that your choice is one thread in a rich, unfolding fabric of possibility. And the thread you choose to weave with becomes your life, vibrant, singular, and real. So the next time you hesitate, the next time you wonder if this choice matters, if this moment will change anything, remember this. It already has. In one version of the world, it changed everything. In this one too, perhaps. And even in all the others, the ripple of your consciousness, your attention still flows outward. Not all at once, not with noise, but like a slow, widening ring in a still pond. You never lose a path. You just stop walking one of them. And even that is a kind of grace. Picture, if you will, a great tree. Its trunk is thick, steady and strong. The story of your life so far. From the base, the early years stretch upward in a single path, firm and seemingly straightforward. But then, as time moves forward, the branches begin. Some small, some sprawling, some so subtle you might miss them, unless you trace them carefully with your eyes. Each branch begins with a choice. Some are obvious, the kind you remember clearly, the kind that made your heart pound or your breath pause. The job you took, the one you turned down, the person you left behind, the one you stayed for, the day you said no, even though it might have been easier to say yes. But many others are quiet, almost imperceptible. The glance you gave a stranger, the walk you didn't take, the question you almost asked. The moment you hesitated, then moved on, they all count. Every one. And according to one of the most quietly beautiful ideas in modern physics, every single one of those moments didn't erase what could have been. Instead, the tree simply grew another branch. The many worlds interpretation, first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in the 1950s, suggests that each quantum event, each interaction where the outcome could go more than one way, results not in one reality being selected and the others discarded, but in all outcomes unfolding, each in its own newly created universe. In one, the photon goes left, in another, it goes right, and both versions continue, forever diverging like twin rivers flowing away from a shared spring. Now take that principle, that quiet, mathematically defensible idea, and apply it not just to particles but to people. Apply it to you. What if your life, rather than being a single path with occasional moments of change, is more like that tree, endlessly branching, each decision not closing a door but opening two? You're here now, listening to this, living this version of your life, a beautiful, complex, unfinished chapter in the ever-growing story of you. But out there, in another branch, another version of you might be doing something slightly different. Perhaps they stayed in that city you left. Perhaps they picked up the phone and called. Perhaps they danced when you held back. And perhaps, though this can be hard to grasp, those versions of you are not just theoretical, not just ideas, but real, unfolding, breathing stories in the great branching canopy of possibility. You won't meet them. You can't. The structure of the universe, at least as far as we understand, keeps each timeline isolated from the others. This process is called decoherence, and it's what prevents the worlds from bleeding into each other, from overlapping in chaotic and impossible ways. Once the branches split, they grow independently, each one evolving according to its own conditions. Still, something within you might sense their presence, not through sight or sound, but through emotion, through intuition, through the quiet ache of wondering who you might have been. There's a softness to this concept despite its scientific backbone. It's not about regret or what you've lost, it's about grace. Because if every version of your life exists somewhere, not as fantasy, but as reality, then perhaps there's comfort in knowing that every version of you is still becoming, still learning, still growing. The tree doesn't stop at one split. It doesn't choose a favourite branch and prune the rest. It grows outward, endlessly, with each part of itself carrying the memory of the whole, and that includes you. There's a quiet humility in imagining yourself as just one leaf in a vast living network of versions, a single voice in a many-toned choir of selves, each one singing a slightly different note, yet all part of the same song. You're not alone, and you're not limited. You're surrounded by the soft echoes of paths not taken, not as hauntings, but as harmonies. When you dream of being someone else, doing something else, you might be glimpsing the memory of another branch. When you feel sudden sadness or joy without a cause, maybe it's the wind moving through the tree, stirring something deep in a neighbouring leaf. We often carry the weight of our decisions, believing that what we choose defines not only who we are, but who we can be. And to some extent that's true, but perhaps it's also true that no version of you is ever truly erased. Each one continues somewhere, shaped by the same roots, reaching toward the same sun. And when you find yourself at a crossroads, hesitating between one path and another, you might pause and wonder, which one is right? Which one will lead to the best version of me? But maybe that question misses something essential. Maybe there isn't just one right path. Maybe the moment you choose, the tree simply grows again, and both versions of you continue. This thought doesn't make your choices meaningless. It makes them sacred. Because even if every possibility exists, only one version of you gets to live this version here and now with these people, in this breath, listening to the sentence. So tend this branch well, water it with love and patience and forgiveness, and know that somewhere the other yous are doing the same, reaching outward, leaf by leaf, into the soft mystery of becoming. And as the world outside your window dims and softens, your body too begins its quiet descent, not into nothingness, but into a different kind of living. One without to-do lists, without clocks, without names. A space where you no longer need to hold yourself together. A space where stories rearrange themselves, time unknots, and places you've never been feel like home. This is sleep. But more specifically, this is the part of sleep that dreams. For most of the night, your brain cycles through stages like a tide, drifting in and out of deeper and lighter waves. But there are moments when a certain rhythm sets in, and something remarkable begins to unfold. This is REM sleep, short for rapid eye movement, named for the way your eyes dart beneath closed lids as if watching scenes on an invisible screen. During these phases, your brain becomes almost as active as when you're awake, yet your body remains still, held in a gentle paralysis to keep you from acting out the stories unfolding inside your head. But unlike waking life, where logic demands straight lines and predictable outcomes, the dream world thrives in paradox. A hallway stretches forever but leads back to your bedroom. A stranger knows your name before you've spoken. You're both child and adult in the same skin at the same moment. It doesn't make sense, and yet it feels true. That truth doesn't come from the part of your brain responsible for analysis or rational thought. During REM sleep, your prefrontal cortex, the region involved in planning, judgment, and self-awareness, becomes unusually quiet. It doesn't vanish, but it steps back, like a teacher leaving the room so the students can draw on the chalkboard. In its place, other regions, particularly those involved in emotion and memory, such as the amygdala and the limbic system, become more active. This rearrangement of brain activity is part of why dreams feel so intensely emotional and yet so fluid, so strange. You aren't bound by logic or linear time. You aren't editing yourself. You're watching stories play out, not because they're true, but because they carry something more essential, a feeling, a fear, a longing that needs space to move. Some scientists believe this is your brain's way of processing the emotional residue of the day, sorting, filing, discarding, reinterpreting. But others go further, suggesting that dreams don't just process emotion, they rehearse it. That during dreams, your mind runs simulations, not just of what happened, but of what could have happened. That it imagines how things might unfold in alternate versions of your life, not with precision, but with emotional honesty. This idea that dreams are not memories but rehearsals is one that feels eerily close to the concept of parallel selves. Because while the scientific framework is different, the emotional experience is often the same. You wake up from a dream that wasn't real, and yet the grief, the joy, the fear, they linger. They feel like yours. You may know intellectually that what you saw wasn't part of this waking life, and yet it feels as though you just left somewhere. Not an imagined story, a place, a version of life. And perhaps that's what makes dreams so compelling. They don't ask permission, they don't obey. They arrive uninvited, drawing you into a version of yourself that you didn't consciously choose. And yet, for the span of a night, you believe it. You inhabit it fully. You don't question whether it makes sense that your childhood home is also a spaceship, or that someone who's no longer alive just sat beside you and whispered a truth you didn't know you needed. You just live it. And then you wake, slowly, perhaps with your heart still aching, or with a memory that begins to dissolve even as you try to hold on to it. You blink at the ceiling and feel the strange texture of the dream still resting on your skin. For a moment, you're both here and elsewhere. Where did you go? Science will tell you that dreams are neural activity, woven from fragments of memory, imagination, and emotional residue, and that's true. Or at least it's part of the truth. But the part we live, the part we feel, is harder to explain. It's not just about what the brain is doing. It's about where the self goes when the rest of you falls quiet. Some traditions have long believed that dreaming is a kind of travel, not of the body, but of the awareness, a shifting, a tuning into another rhythm of being. And while science hasn't proven this in any conventional sense, the idea continues to resonate. Because you don't dream like a spectator, you dream like a participant, and when you wake, something inside you remembers, even if the details don't. Perhaps it's more than metaphor to say you went somewhere, that for a while you inhabited a different version of life, that your brain, freed from the strict corridors of waking thought, allowed itself to wander down a nearby hallway, a neighbouring branch on the tree of who you might have been, and maybe, while you dream, other versions of you are dreaming too, each sending quiet signals through the fabric of sleep, each stirring with stories they didn't quite live but still hold close. The boundaries between dream and memory, imagination and reality, self and other, are thinner than they seem, and in the stillness of night, as the brain rearranges its wiring and the mind drifts unanchored, something passes through, not a fact but a feeling, a sense that you're not a single self sealed in one timeline, that you are a constellation, a possibility unfolding. There are mornings when you wake not with the weight of sleep still pulling at your body, but with the strange residue of something more elusive, a dream that doesn't quite feel like yours, not because it was frightening or strange or impossible, but because it left behind a story that feels lived, and yet doesn't fit into the shelves of memory you recognize as your own. Perhaps you woke from a love so deep it left your chest aching, but with no name to attach it to. Or you walk through an unfamiliar house, one you've never seen before, yet you knew exactly where everything was. The creak in the floorboards, the way the light filtered through the curtains, the chipped corner of the kitchen tile. These are dreams that arrive fully formed, not as puzzles to be solved, but as lives half remembered. They feel complete, self-contained. You weren't visiting a world, you were in it, moving through it not as a guest but as someone returning home. And yet, the moment you open your eyes, the logic collapses, the people vanish, the emotion lingers, but the names, if there were any, begin to dissolve. And so you lie there, caught between waking and forgetting, wondering, where did that come from? Who was I in that dream? The brain, as science explains it, is a remarkable storyteller. During dreams, it draws from an enormous archive of fragments, moments you've lived, faces you've seen in crowds, emotions that haven't quite found their resolution. The continuity hypothesis of dreaming proposes that our dreams are stitched together from our waking lives. Rearranged scenes, reorganized memories, emotional echoes strung into narrative by a brain that never truly stops weaving. And in many cases that explanation fits. You dream of your school days not exactly as they were, but mixed with your current job. A childhood friend appears wearing the face of someone you met last week. Your dog is there, but he talks. Nothing is quite right, and yet it all makes a certain dream logic kind of sense. But what about those dreams that feel untouched by your current life? Those that carry an emotional tone so deep, so foreign, so real that you wake not just surprised, but disoriented. Some researchers suggest that dreams are emotional simulators, tools your brain uses to safely explore situations you've never encountered in waking life. In this view, dreaming is rehearsal, not just for what might happen, but for what could have happened, for the versions of your life that almost were. You didn't move to that city, but your brain runs the simulation anyway, filling in the gaps with what it imagines might have been true. You didn't speak to that person on the train, but your mind remembers their face, and perhaps somewhere in the deeper folds of consciousness, it builds a story around them, testing how it would have felt had you spoken, had you stayed, had you chosen differently. And yet, even that doesn't always capture the feeling. Because some dreams don't feel like simulations, they feel like borrowed moments, like you slipped briefly into a life adjacent to your own, a nearby reality, a version of you who turned left when you turned right, and just for a while, a breath, a night, you were there instead of here. It may sound far-fetched, and yet it's not so different from what some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest, that every decision, every outcome spins off into its own reality. If that's the case, then perhaps our dreams, under certain conditions, could serve as windows. Not in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical one, a soft perceptual bleed between adjacent selves, a kind of overlap. Most of the time, these other versions of you remain sealed away, inaccessible, invisible. But maybe dreaming, with its lack of boundaries and loosened logic, offers just enough space for something to pass through. A flicker, a moment, a feeling that isn't entirely yours, but isn't entirely foreign either. Have you ever woken with tears in your eyes, mourning someone who doesn't exist? Or felt a profound longing for a place you've never seen? Or woken up laughing at a memory you can't trace, only to spend the entire day wondering if it was a dream or something else entirely? It's easy to dismiss those feelings as misfiring neurons, but if you pause, if you hold them gently instead of pushing them away, they often carry a certain weight, a kind of emotional architecture too intricate to be random. And maybe the point isn't to figure out where the dream came from or whose life it belonged to. Maybe the point is simply to acknowledge that your mind is larger than the life you remember, that your inner world is vast enough to hold not just your experiences, but shadows of others. Imagined, rehearsed, parallel, or otherwise. Because whether dreams are simulations, metaphors, memories in disguise, or quiet echoes of other selves, they remind us of something deeply human, that our identity is not a single thread. It is a tapestry, a shifting, breathing composition of selves we are, were, and might have been. And in that quiet space between sleep and waking, you are allowed to feel all of them at once. Not to choose, not to judge, but simply to experience. So the next time you wake from a dream that leaves you disoriented, aching, or curiously comforted, the next time you feel as though you've just returned from somewhere unplaceable, perhaps you have. Perhaps that life isn't gone. Perhaps it's still unfolding. And perhaps somewhere in the vast map of consciousness, another version of you is waking now, from a dream of this life, wondering the very same thing. Some dreams don't just leave an impression, they leave a wound, or a warmth, a sharp, sudden sense of something that mattered deeply, even though it came from nowhere. You might wake with tears in your eyes, your pillow damp, your breathing uneven, your heart still aching with the weight of a story that your waking mind doesn't recognize. And yet, the grief feels real, the joy lingers, the fear takes hours to fade. You tell yourself it was only a dream, but your body isn't convinced. It responds as if something truly happened, as if you lived through a moment powerful enough to shift your emotional center of gravity. And in a way, you did. Not with your hands, perhaps, but with something deeper, something rooted in the fabric of perception, in the network of emotions that lives quietly beneath thought. This isn't just poetic musing. Your brain, while dreaming, behaves as though the emotions it conjures are real, and so your body follows. During certain stages of REM sleep, your amygdala, a small almond-shaped region deep in the brain responsible for processing fear, memory, and emotional intensity, becomes highly active. It doesn't differentiate between real loss and imagined heartbreak, between danger in waking life and the flicker of fear in a dream. If your mind believes it, even briefly, your body will respond accordingly. This is why you might feel drained after a dream where someone you love disappears. Why you might wake up smiling after a dream filled with laughter, only to feel a quiet sadness set in as you realize the people who made you laugh do not exist, or at least not here. But what if those feelings aren't just random artifacts of neural activity? What if some of them belong to someone else, or rather, to another version of you? It's a strange question, one that stretches the edges of what most people consider possible. But if you've accepted, even tentatively, the idea that multiple versions of you might exist, scattered across parallel paths, each shaped by different choices, then the next question comes quietly, like a whisper just behind the ear. Is it possible to feel what another you is feeling? Science doesn't have a definitive answer. Most would say no. that consciousness is sealed, that each version of you, if it exists, is confined to its own timeline, unaware of the others. And yet, feelings don't always respect boundaries. They don't ask for permission to arise. They arrive unannounced, full-formed, without explanation. You've likely felt it yourself. A sudden wave of sadness while folding laundry. An unexpected joy while walking alone, without any obvious trigger. A sharp nostalgia for something that never quite happened. These moments are usually dismissed as passing moods or glitches in emotional memory, but perhaps, under certain conditions, in the loosened architecture of dreams or in the soft stillness of thought, something subtle passes between versions of you. Not words, not facts, but feelings. A faint resonance. An emotional echo from another dimension of your life. Imagine this. In another branch of reality, you said something you regretted, and the version of you there carries that weight. That moment, unresolved, ripples through their story, and in your dream you feel it. Not the details, not the scene, just the heaviness, the longing to make something right. You wake with a sense of apology that doesn't quite belong, but still stays with you. Or perhaps, in another life, something wonderful happened. A reunion, a realization, a relief. And in your dream, you find yourself filled with gratitude you can't explain. It hums beneath the surface of your day like a forgotten song that still knows the melody. This doesn't mean that parallel lives are sending messages to you. It doesn't mean dreams are portals, or that your other selves are aware of you. But maybe, just maybe, the fabric of consciousness is more porous than we understand. Maybe, like ripples in a pond, strong emotions don't stop at the edge of one reality. Maybe they travel, faintly, distantly, like signals moving through fog, reaching across space not as information, but as affect, as feeling. You don't need to believe this literally to feel its emotional truth, because even within your single life, you've experienced versions of yourself that feel like distant relatives. The you who once lived in a different city, the you before a great heartbreak, the you after someone you loved was gone. These selves still live inside you, not as memories, but as feelings. So is it so strange to think that your other selves, the ones who took different paths, might feel close to you even if you never meet? Dreams may be the space where those selves become momentarily visible, not as whole people but as sensations, as grief that doesn't belong to your current story, as tenderness for someone your waking mind doesn't recognize, but your dreaming heart loves deeply. You might not understand the image, you might forget the plot, but the feeling remains, and in that feeling something soft and mysterious lingers. The idea that you are more than just one story, that you're an intersection of selves, echoing quietly across timelines, each carrying their own truth, their own weight, their own beauty. You don't need to decode your dreams. You don't need to assign them meaning or turn them into puzzles to be solved. You can simply hold them gently, like fireflies in cupped hands, and let them glow for a moment before drifting away. So if, one night you wake from a dream and feel a grief that doesn't make sense, or a joy that seems unearned, pause before you brush it aside. It may be nothing, or it may be a faint signal, not from someone else, but from another you, a self you'll never meet, a self who dreamed of you too. It can happen anywhere, at any time. You're mid-conversation, or walking into a room, or picking up a cup of tea, when suddenly something slips. Not the object in your hand, something deeper. A feeling stirs. Your breath catches, ever so slightly. And before you even know what's happening, a thought rises from somewhere uninvited. I've been here before, but you haven't. Not really. You know you haven't. The setting is new, the conversation unfamiliar, and yet the sensation roots itself deeper than logic can reach. There's no clear memory, no anchor to a past event, just a soft certainty that this moment, exactly this one, has already passed through you once before, wearing the same clothes, humming the same note, glancing in just this direction. This is déjà vu, one of the most quietly disorienting experiences we know. It doesn't shout, it doesn't linger long, but it leaves behind a peculiar stillness, like the echo of a bell rung just out of hearing, and it asks questions, not in words but in the silence that follows. What just happened? Why did that feel like a memory I never made? For all its mystery, déjà vu has long been a subject of serious scientific study. Neurologists and psychologists have explored its roots with careful patience, seeking causes not in mysticism, but in the structure of the brain. One common explanation involves the temporal lobe, a region essential for memory processing. Sometimes, a misfire in the electrical activity of this region can create the illusion of familiarity by signalling that something has already been encoded as memory, even if it hasn't. In this view, déjà vu is a kind of brain hiccup, a false positive in the memory system. The sensation of familiarity is real, but the source of that familiarity is a glitch, a mismatch. The brain, for just a moment, mistakenly believes it's seeing something it already knows. Some studies even link déjà vu to micro-seizure activity, especially in individuals with certain forms of epilepsy, though most people who experience it don't have any such condition. Another hypothesis involves split perception, the idea that we sometimes unconsciously take in a scene or stimulus before we consciously notice it. For example, you may glance at a street just out of the corner of your eye and only fully register it seconds later. Because your brain has already begun processing it, the second glance feels oddly familiar. All of these theories are useful. They're grounded, studied, and carefully tested. But none of them seem to capture the full emotional weight of déjà vu, the deep emotional conviction that this moment has returned from somewhere. Not simply been misfiled, returned. This is where science and philosophy begin to hum in harmony, each holding a piece of a puzzle they cannot complete alone. Because sometimes what déjà vu evokes isn't just familiarity, it's recognition. Not of an object or a place, but of a path. A quiet sense that you've walked this stretch of life before. Not in a previous day, but in a parallel one. That you're not remembering the past, but brushing against a version of reality that runs alongside yours. A version in which you're making the same choices or different ones in a rhythm just close enough to resonate. Perhaps this is only metaphor. Perhaps your mind, in its complexity, builds meaning where there is none. But even if that were true, it would still be remarkable that the mind can produce not just stories, but emotional truths, feelings that carry weight even when the facts do not align. But if it's not only metaphor, if there is a deeper reality beneath the sensation, then déjà vu may be something else entirely, not a glitch, not a malfunction, but a crossing, a place where your awareness, briefly and wordlessly, touches another version of itself. Imagine for a moment that timelines are not strictly sealed, that each version of your life exists like a thread in a vast tapestry. Most of the time, these threads never touch, but perhaps, under certain conditions, during specific emotional frequencies, or in moments of heightened sensitivity, two threads drift close enough to brush against one another. The contact isn't loud, it doesn't break anything, it simply creates a shimmer, a flicker of recognition where none should exist. It's possible that déjà vu is your mind's way of noticing that shimmer, that momentary overlap, that another you, in another unfolding of time, stood where you're standing now, said what you're saying now, looked up at the same sky and wondered if this moment was theirs or yours. You don't have to believe this literally. You don't have to rewrite your understanding of the universe. But the emotional truth of it, the gentle weight, may still be worth honouring. Because when you feel déjà vu, what you're feeling is presence. The presence of something larger than your current memory can hold. And perhaps that's what matters most. Not whether déjà vu is caused by a neural misfire or a glimpse into a parallel life, but that it reminds you, even if just for a moment, that your experience is not always linear, that time is not always a clean river. Sometimes it folds, sometimes it echoes, and sometimes, just sometimes, it calls you by a name you almost remember. Memory is a strange kind of possession. You don't hold it like an object. You don't place it on a shelf and pull it down when you need it. Memory moves. It shifts, softens, rewrites itself in the margins when you're not looking. Some memories remain vivid for decades, anchored so firmly they seem part of your bones. Others vanish within hours, as if they were never truly yours to begin with. And then there are memories that appear suddenly, without invitation, ones you can't trace, can't date, can't link to any known part of your life, and yet they feel real. They feel like something that happened, or almost happened, or happened to someone very much like you. The brain, of course, has its reasons. During sleep, especially in REM phases, memory doesn't rest. It reorganizes. It reviews the day's events, yes, but it also pulls older material from the vault, combining, reshuffling, integrating it with emotional cues. Scientists have found that dreams are not passive recordings of lived events, but rather dynamic recreations, memories rehearsed, fragmented, reassembled into new configurations. The hippocampus, which plays a crucial role in forming new memories, behaves differently during sleep. While awake, it helps bind experiences into coherent timelines. But in dreams, coherence isn't required. Continuity gives way to emotional weight. The result is something less like a photograph and more like a painting. Blended edges, shifted proportions, emotional colour replacing objective detail. That's why you might dream of a place that never existed but feels like home. Why you might see someone who doesn't resemble a real person, but whom you instantly trust, or fear, or mourn. Your brain isn't recalling, it's composing, and what it creates doesn't have to be true to be meaningful. But here is where the edges begin to blur. What if some of these compositions aren't entirely born from your own experience? What if some of them are borrowed, or shared? If parallel versions of you exist, each shaped by different decisions, each building their own library of memories, then perhaps, just perhaps, those memories don't remain entirely sealed away. Perhaps they leak. Not in the way light bleeds through a window, but more like warmth from the next room. Faint. Software, noticeable, only when everything else is still. And if memory is slippery, if it resists fixed containers, then the memories of another you might, under the right conditions, slip into your own archive. Not as fully formed recollections, but as sensations. A sudden familiarity with something you've never done. A flash of emotion while walking down an unfamiliar street. A memory fragment without context. A face. A phrase. A feeling that doesn't belong to any moment you can name. Some scientists call these false memories. Reconstructions that feel real but lack an actual source. They occur frequently in both waking life and dreams, and while they're often viewed as flaws in the system, others see them as necessary features. The brain isn't designed for perfect recall, or it's designed for narrative. It edits constantly, trying to maintain a cohesive sense of who you are. And sometimes, to keep the story flowing, it invents details, it fills in gaps. But if the story it's telling is larger than you know, if it stretches across multiple versions of you, then maybe those inventions aren't errors. Maybe they're bridges. There's a metaphor that might help. Imagine your memory as a sand sculpture. When the sand is wet and fresh, the details are crisp, but over time it dries, the edges blur, and if you grip it too tightly, trying to preserve its form, the grains slip between your fingers. But if you relax your grasp, if you hold it gently, the shape can remain. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. Now imagine that this sculpture is not being built by just one you, but by many, each one shaping their own corner, each one unaware of the others, but working from the same raw material. Sometimes your hands will touch the part another version of you is shaping, and though you'll never see them, never speak, you'll feel something, a trace, an echo, the impression of a memory that wasn't yours alone. That might be all déjà vu is. That might be what happens when a memory fragment, slippery, imprecise, drifts from one branch of your life to another. You recognize the emotional structure of a moment without its factual scaffolding. You feel its shape before you know its name, and when you dream, your mind may become more porous. The barriers between timelines, identities, and experiences soften. The archive becomes open, not just to what has happened, but to what could have happened, or what did elsewhere. You don't have to see this literally. It can be metaphor if you wish, a poetic frame for how consciousness processes meaning. But even in that frame, something essential remains. The self is not a sealed container. It's more like a field, wide, changing, touched by wind from directions you can't always trace. So the next time you feel a memory forming that doesn't seem to belong to any moment you can place, when an image or emotion rises and you can't explain why it matters, pause. Let it exist without a label. Let it move through you without needing a home. It might be yours, or it might be borrowed. Either way, it's part of the story, because memory is not only about what has been. Sometimes it's a glimpse of what might have been, or what still is, unfolding quietly on a branch just out of reach. You wake up in the morning and you are, it seems, still you. The same you who fell asleep last night. The same name, same body, same collection of memories and habits. The same favourite mug in the kitchen. The same sigh when you check the time. A seamless continuation, as if your life were one long ribbon unrolling neatly across the hours, and yet if you paused, really paused, and looked closely, the illusion would begin to shimmer. You're not the same person who fell asleep as a child in a different bed, years or decades ago. You're not the same person who stood in that classroom, who whispered into the dark, who said yes or no, or maybe to the choices that shaped you. Your cells have changed. Your beliefs have shifted. Your thoughts, your voice, even the way your eyes take in the light. They have all transformed slowly, quietly, without asking for your permission. Still, you feel continuous. You feel like you've always been this version of you, stretching cleanly from your first memory to the moment you're in now. That feeling, that comforting sense of internal coherence, is what psychologists call the narrative self. It's not a fact, but a story, a thread your brain weaves out of scattered experiences, drawing a line through chaos so you don't feel like a stranger in your own life. Philosophers have long explored the tension between this illusion and reality. One of the oldest thought experiments in this space is the ship of Theseus. The story goes like this. If you have a ship, and you slowly replace each plank one by one until none of the original wood remains, is it still the same ship? And if someone took all the discarded planks and built a new ship from them, which one is the real one? It's a puzzle of identity, a question of what continuity really means. If everything has changed, but you still feel whole, what exactly are you? Now imagine that instead of wood and nails, it's your memories, your behaviours, your relationships that shift over time. Every few years you're not rebuilt in a single moment, but reassembled quietly day by day. Still you, and yet unmistakably altered. This isn't just philosophy, it's biology. Every cell in your body has its own timeline, its own cycle of growth and decay. The lining of your stomach is replaced every few days. Your skin regenerates roughly every month. Even the bones you stand on are in a slow, patient process of renewal. You are a river wearing the same name. And if you accept that, if you acknowledge that the self is not a fixed point but a moving current, then something strange and beautiful opens up. Perhaps you is not a noun. Perhaps you is a verb, not a static object in space, but a process unfolding in time, a becoming, not a being. And here's where the quantum metaphor slips in like a soft breeze through an open window. In quantum decision theory, and in the many worlds, interpretation of quantum physics, there is no single collapsed timeline. Every possible path that could be taken is taken. Every choice creates a branching of reality, a divergence, a soft splitting of what could be from what is. If that's true, then even your identity isn't a single thread, it's a braid, a weave of paths taken and not taken, a tangle of alternate decisions, each version of you walking softly into their own moment, never meeting, but somehow part of the same vast structure. And maybe that's why you sometimes feel echoes of choices you didn't make, regrets that don't quite belong, longings for lives you never lived. Because somewhere in the quantum weave of selves, another version of you took the other path, and the you who sits here now, sipping tea or listening in the dark, still carries the shape of that possibility, like a faint imprint in the sand. You aren't just the sum of your memories, you're also the sum of your might-have-beens, and that's not something to fear, that's something to marvel at, because it means you're not trapped by your past. You're not a single thread that must remain unbroken. You're a braid, and braids bend, they flex, they fold upon themselves in beauty and in strength. So when you feel inconsistent, when you look at an old photo and don't recognize the expression on your own face, or reread an old journal and wonder who wrote it, remember this: it was you. And it wasn't. It was a version of you, standing on a different knot in the braid. Not wrong, just elsewhere. And the version of you who listens now, who dreams of other possibilities, who wonders about déjà vu and parallel lives and choices yet to come, that self is no less real for being in motion. Perhaps the truest form of identity is not in being the same. It is in being coherent while changing, like a melody that shifts keys but still feels like the same song, like the sky that changes colours but never stops being sky. You are not broken when you change. You're not lost when you forget. You're not fake because you feel fragmented. You are a verb. You're becoming. There's a curious feeling that sometimes creeps in during quiet moments, late at night perhaps, or in the pause between two thoughts, a sensation that you're not entirely alone in your own mind, not in the way that suggests something is wrong or fractured, but in a softer, more poetic sense, as though the self you call you is actually a small constellation, a gathering of voices, each one holding a piece of your truth. You've likely felt it without naming it, a sudden conflict between two inner responses, one calm and one afraid, or a memory from years ago that surfaces unexpectedly, not as a visual but as an attitude, a flavour, a lens through which the present moment momentarily shifts. One moment you feel wise, the next petulant, then vulnerable, then brave, and none of it is wrong. It's just that all these versions of you seem to move through the same skin at once, taking turns behind the steering wheel. Psychologists might call this internal multiplicity, a normal, often healthy part of cognition in which the mind contains different modes, voices, or fragments of personality that reflect life experience. But long before psychology gave it a name, poets and storytellers hinted at the same truth, that we are not singular beings. We are made of layers. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and thinker, gave language to some of these layers in the form of archetypes. He suggested that beneath our individual identities lies a deep reservoir of shared symbols and instincts, the collective unconscious. This is where the wise old woman, the trickster, the hero, the child, all live, not just in stories, but in us. They rise during dreams. They whisper when we're faced with uncertainty. They guide and confuse and comfort us, all without needing to be seen. But what if these internal characters aren't just universal templates? What if sometimes they feel so real, so distinct and emotionally vivid, because they are closer to actual selves? Not myths borrowed from humanity's oldest stories, but subtle shades of who you might have become. This is where dream logic and quantum theory gently brush against each other. We've already considered the possibility that every major decision in your life might have created a branching path, one where another version of you exists, living out the consequences of a different choice. In that view, your mind may not only carry the weight of past memories and present anxieties, but echoes from those nearby versions. Not their facts, but their feelings. Not their timeline, but their texture. And so, in dreams or in moments of deep intuition, you may feel someone rise in you, a version of yourself who stayed behind or moved away, or never let go of that one thing you surrendered. Maybe the dream is a cafe in a city you've never visited, but you know exactly what to order. You know the way the chair creaks when you sit down. You know the name of the person at the table beside you. None of it belongs to this life, but you feel at home. It's tempting to call that fantasy, or to file it under imagination. But even imagination is a mysterious act. It doesn't conjure from nothing. It arranges the known, the felt, the nearly remembered. And if your identity is more like a stage than a single spotlight, then perhaps these shadow selves aren't background extras. Perhaps they're actors in their own right, waiting for the curtain to lift. Your mind, especially during sleep or quiet reflection, may not be a sealed chamber, but a soft theatre where many selves are allowed to breathe. You do not become them, but you allow them to be felt. And perhaps, in doing so, you experience a form of quiet integration. You let the version of you who never left home sit beside the version who always runs. You let the cautious self speak to the reckless one. You let them all be part of your awareness, even if only for a moment. It's not disorder, it's not confusion, it's complexity. And in complexity, there is often clarity, not of answers, but of compassion. You begin to realize that your contradictions aren't failures of logic. They are the voices of paths not taken, of archetypes you carry, of parallel selves that still exist in the vast echo chamber of possibility. This is why we sometimes cry during dreams we can't explain, why we feel heartbreak for someone we've never met, why we wake from a long, meandering dream and spend the rest of the day under the weight of a decision we don't remember making, because the boundaries between selves, between who we are and who we could have been, are more porous than we think. Maybe it's not that the dream was just a dream. Maybe it was a soft gathering of the crowd within you, a quiet meeting of inner voices held behind closed eyes. And maybe, just maybe, the self you feel in this moment is not the only self living here. Maybe there is an audience within you, listening, not judging, not interrupting, just listening. Because they too know what it's like to wonder what might have been. We talk about choices as though they are brief moments, discrete, isolated events in time, a fork in the road, a coin flipped, a door opened or shut. But the truth is quieter and heavier. A choice doesn't vanish once made. It becomes a kind of mirror, one you carry with you, often unnoticed, until one day the light hits it just right, and you catch a glimpse of who you might have been. There's a peculiar weight to that kind of reflection. Not always regret exactly, though sometimes it's that too, but something softer, more difficult to name. A wondering, a wistfulness, a tenderness for the lives that didn't unfold, for the selves you didn't get to become. Maybe you stayed in your hometown instead of moving away, or said yes when you might have said no. Maybe you turned down a job, ended a relationship, followed your head instead of your heart, or the other way around. And even if you're content with your path, you may still feel a faint echo now and then, a sense that somewhere another version of you walked through that other door, that their life is still unfolding in a direction you can almost imagine, but never quite reach. This doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. In fact, most of the time, there is no wrong, just divergence, just different threads spun out from the same moment of tension. But it does mean that part of the human experience is this quiet double vision, this knowledge that every act of becoming is also an act of not becoming. You are who you are in part because of everything you're not. And that's where choice becomes something more than decision. It, beside the version who always runs. You let the cautious self speak to the reckless one. You let them all be part of your awareness, even if only for a moment. It's not disorder, it's not confusion, it's complexity. And in complexity, there is often clarity, not of answers, but of compassion. You begin to realize that your contradictions aren't failures of logic. They are the voices of paths not taken, of archetypes you carry, of parallel selves that still exist in the vast echo chamber of possibility. This is why we sometimes cry during dreams we can't explain, why we feel heartbreak for someone we've never met, why we wake from a long, meandering dream and spend the rest of the day under the weight of a decision we don't remember making. Because the boundaries between selves, between who we are and who we could have been, are more porous than we think. Maybe it's not that the dream was just a dream. Maybe it was a soft gathering of the crowd within you, a quiet meeting of inner voices held behind closed eyes. And maybe, just maybe, the self you feel in this moment is not the only self living here. Maybe there is an audience within you, listening, not judging, not interrupting, just listening. Because they too know what it's like to wonder what might have been. We talk about choices as though they are brief moments, discrete, isolated events in time, a fork in the road, a coin flipped, a door opened or shut. But the truth is quieter and heavier. A choice doesn't vanish once made. It becomes a kind of mirror, one you carry with you, often unnoticed, until one day the light hits it just right, and you catch a glimpse of who you might have been. There's a peculiar weight to that kind of reflection. Not always regret exactly, though sometimes it's that too, but something softer, more difficult to name. A wondering, a wistfulness, a tenderness for the lives that didn't unfold, for the selves you didn't get to become. Maybe you stayed in your hometown instead of moving away, or said yes when you might have said no. Maybe you turned down a job, ended a relationship, followed your head instead of your heart, or the other way around. And even if you're content with your path, you may still feel a faint echo now and then, a sense that somewhere another version of you walked through that other door, that their life is still unfolding in a direction you can almost imagine, but never quite reach. This doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. In fact, most of the time, there is no wrong, just divergence, just different threads spun out from the same moment of tension. But it does mean that part of the human experience is this quiet double vision, this knowledge that every act of becoming is also an act of not becoming. You are who you are in part because of everything you're not. And that's where choice becomes something more than decision. It, trust, pause, not out of fear but out of reverence, because you are not just choosing a direction, you are choosing a self. You are shaping the tone of your next sentence in the story that is only yours to write. And the mirror of what might have been, it will still be there, but not to haunt you, to remind you of your complexity, to show you the beautiful expanse of what it means to be unfinished, and always, always becoming. Dreams have always been a place of quiet strangeness, a theatre where logic takes its shoes off, where time forgets how to behave, where your memories are borrowed, rearranged, or spoken by voices that never had names. But every so often something shifts. A thread pulls taut in the fabric of the dream and you realize with eerie clarity, this isn't real. Yet you don't wake. You remain inside the dream, aware. The sky may be purple, the laws of physics a little lazy, and still, you know, you're dreaming. And somehow in that moment the rules change. The landscape responds to your thoughts. You can fly, or speak to the dead, or walk through walls, not by magic, but by permission. This is lucid dreaming, a state in which the dreamer becomes aware they are dreaming, and sometimes gains control over the dream itself. It's not as rare as it sounds. Many people experience it at least once in their lives, often by accident. But for some, it becomes a gentle practice, a doorway to creativity, healing, exploration, or curiosity about the self that only reveals itself behind closed eyes. From a scientific perspective, lucid dreaming sits in an unusual place. It occurs during REM sleep, the phase typically associated with vivid, emotionally rich dreams. What's fascinating is that in lucid REM states, certain areas of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-awareness and critical thinking, become partially reactivated. In most dreams this region is quiet, but during lucidity it stirs, like a night watchman checking on the dream. This hybrid state, part dreaming, part waking, creates a bridge, and that bridge opens more than just personal agency inside the dream. It opens a question. If you can become aware inside a dream, can you become aware inside a parallel life? Some researchers have gone further. In a few carefully designed studies, scientists have successfully communicated with people while they were in lucid dreams. By asking questions using prearranged signals, like flicking their eyes left and right to indicate a response, dreamers were able to answer math problems, respond to verbal cues, and even interact in real time from within the dream world. This suggests that dreams are not entirely sealed chambers. Under certain conditions, information can move through them. So it's not unreasonable to ask, if data can cross from waking life into dreams, might something cross from elsewhere? From other branches of the self? Imagine this. In your dream, you're walking down a street you don't recognize, and yet every detail feels familiar. You turn a corner and see someone you've never met, and you know their name. You speak fluently in a language you've never studied. You remember a grief that isn't yours. But in that dream, it fits. These things are often written off as dream logic, as the mind simply playing with scraps of memory. But in the context of parallel versions of you, it opens another possibility. Perhaps what you're experiencing isn't random. Perhaps lucid dreaming is not just an act of control, but an act of alignment. You're not just dreaming inside your usual architecture of thought. You're drifting closer to another version of you, one who lives a slightly different life, holds different memories, speaks different truths. And in the lucidity of that moment, with your awareness turned inward and the outside world silenced, your consciousness becomes a window. Not a wide one, not always clear, but a window nonetheless. You may not be able to look through it with precision, but you can sense the shape of another room on the other side, another dreamer, another life, another you, paused in mid-thought, brushing against your own awareness like silk against silk. This isn't to say lucid dreams are portals, but perhaps they are places where the walls between timelines become thin, where awareness becomes supple enough to stretch across boundaries we don't yet understand. Maybe you're not meant to take souvenirs from those encounters. Maybe you're just meant to feel them. That gentle recognition, the warmth of being someone more than what your waking life can explain, may be enough. It doesn't need to be verified to matter. Because what you bring back from those lucid windows isn't proof. It's resonance. The feeling of being more than singular. And in a world that so often asks us to reduce ourselves to roles, titles, histories, and facts, that quiet resonance, that flicker of vastness within, is a kind of rebellion, a kind of remembering. So if one night you find yourself inside a dream and realize it's a dream, pause, look around, See what changes. Try not to control it right away. Instead, ask yourself, who am I here? What part of me is dreaming this? And what do I know in this moment that I didn't know before I slept? You may not get an answer, but sometimes the question is the opening. The lucid moment itself is the message. And as the dream shifts, as you fly or fall or fade back into the blur of unconsciousness, carry this with you. You are aware inside the impossible. You saw the dream and the self at the same time, and that, in itself, is a kind of light. You've likely felt it before, a flicker of emotion that seems to arrive without invitation. You're walking through your day, not thinking of anything in particular, when suddenly a strange sadness washes over you, or a tenderness, or a sense of longing so vivid it momentarily halts your breath. There's no clear trigger, no remembered moment that justifies the feeling, and yet it lingers, quiet, specific, and oddly personal. Where do those feelings come from? Psychologists have many explanations, of course. Emotional states can arise from unnoticed stimuli. A scent, a shift in light, a familiar shape in the corner of your vision. The brain makes associations faster than we can trace them. A childhood memory may resurface without its context. Hormonal cycles, sleep quality, even slight fluctuations in blood sugar can shape mood. And yet, sometimes the explanation doesn't quite feel like enough. Sometimes the feeling is too precise, too heavy, too familiar. It's like remembering a person you've never met, missing a place you've never been, loving someone without a face, without a name, without a story. The German language has a word for this, Sehnsucht, a deep, aching yearning for something you cannot define. Some call it spiritual, others call it romantic. Some say it's the human soul recognizing what it's been missing. But what if, just for a moment, we consider something stranger? What if the feeling doesn't belong to this version of you? In the framework we've been exploring, parallel lives, branching choices, the possibility that versions of yourself exist across quantum threads, it becomes conceivable that emotion might be one of the few things light enough to slip between timelines. Not full memories, not thoughts with structure, but feeling. Raw, untranslatable, unplaceable feeling. Think of emotion as a kind of residue, something that lingers in the air even after the source is gone. In this metaphor, you're not the only candle burning, and sometimes, when the breeze is just right, the scent of another life drifts into your lungs, and you breathe in a grief you didn't earn or a joy you never planted. You don't need to fully believe this. It may be poetry. But poetry, like science, searches for patterns. And perhaps there's a pattern here. You feel a certain longing every time you hear a particular song, even though you've never associated it with anything personal. You sense warmth in the presence of a stranger, as though you've known them across lifetimes. You feel a rush of regret while standing in a room you've never entered before, as though someone inside you remembers what happened here, even if no one in this life does. If each version of you lives out a slightly different emotional landscape, is it so hard to imagine that occasionally those emotional threads brush against each other? That in a moment of stillness, when your conscious mind is quiet and your guard is down, you might catch the tail end of someone else's storm. Of course, there are more grounded explanations for all of this. The brain is a master of pattern recognition. It fills in gaps, invents, context writes meaning into silence. What feels like intuition could be a subtle memory. What feels like recognition might be a trick of attention. And yet science does not exclude poetry. In fact, the two often meet in mystery. Even the field of neuroscience acknowledges that we don't fully understand interoception, the brain's perception of internal signals. Sometimes our emotions precede thought. Sometimes the body knows before the mind does. And in those gaps, between sensation and explanation, feelings bloom without warning. There's a story told by dreamers and mystics that the heart has more rooms than we ever enter, that we are shaped not only by what we experience, but by the capacity for experiences we never have. The version of you who became a parent, the version who became a wanderer, the one who fell in love with someone your waking self never met. They may not be real in the sense we usually demand, but perhaps they are emotionally real, real enough to colour a moment, real enough to leave fingerprints. And if you are ever caught by a wave of emotion that feels displaced, as though it arrived by mistake or by magic, you might choose to pause. Instead of brushing it away or rushing to name it, you could hold it for a while, let it unfold, let it tell its story without words. Maybe it's grief from another self, or longing, or even a celebration echoing through the walls between lives. Maybe it's nothing more than chemistry, but then again, maybe it's chemistry tuned to a different frequency, one that your body still remembers how to feel, even if your mind no longer remembers why. It's tempting to think that only facts matter, that what we can trace, prove, and reproduce is what's true. But feelings don't care about that. Feelings move on their own terms. They don't wait for permission, and sometimes they are the truest things we have. So the next time you feel something strange, sudden and deeply personal, a sorrow with no origin, a joy with no explanation, consider this. It may be your own, or it may be the echo of someone you used to be, in a life you never lived, gently tapping on the walls of this one, not to disrupt, not to intrude, just to remind you you are wide enough to feel more than one life at once. Imagine two bells side by side. You strike the first and it rings clear, resonant, warm. Then you strike the second. It too sings, but with a different tone. For a moment the air is full of overlapping sound, but as time passes the waves drift apart, their harmonies diverge, and slowly the echo of one becomes indistinguishable from the other. What began as a chorus becomes distance, separation. This is one way to think about decoherence, a process in quantum physics that explains why our world appears to follow a single, consistent storyline, even though the underlying rules of quantum mechanics suggest it could behave like an infinite, branching novel. In quantum theory, systems don't begin with certainty. They begin in superposition, a state where many outcomes are possible at once. A particle can be here and there, a cat famously, both alive and not. But when that system interacts with the environment, with light, air, heat, or eventually you, it seems to collapse. One possibility becomes real. The others fade like the notes of the bell you didn't strike. Decoherence is not destruction. It's divergence. It doesn't erase the other possibilities. It simply prevents them from blending. Like droplets of ink placed in still water, these versions of reality begin close, perhaps even overlapping, but drift apart as time moves on. The math suggests they continue to exist, but interaction becomes almost impossible. They no longer interfere with one another. They become quiet. So, if you have indeed split, if every major decision spun off another version of you, why don't you feel it? Why don't the timelines bleed into each other like watercolour across paper? Because decoherence keeps them clean. It's not just that the other versions of you are elsewhere. It's that their existence, in a technical sense, is orthogonal to yours, like chords played in separate rooms, real, vibrant, but unheard from where you sit. And yet, sometimes you might swear you hear something. Not a voice, not a message, just an echo, a faint pull of memory that shouldn't exist, a sense of timing that feels too precise, a glimpse of another way your life could have unfolded, delivered not in vision, but in mood, a dream that leaves you with someone else's heartbreak, a day that begins with the inexplicable feeling that something is missing, even though nothing has changed. Could that be a leak in the silence? Strictly speaking, decoherence says no. The worlds do not interact. The physics is firm, each branch becomes its own closed narrative, its own untouchable page. But human experience doesn't always follow the rules. And where science describes systems, we live stories. Stories are porous. They blur at the edges. They allow contradiction, longing, metaphor. They allow for a kind of resonance that doesn't need cause to be real. Perhaps, like those bells, the tones of other timelines are not gone, just no longer synchronized. Perhaps you don't hear them as sound, but as sensation. Not interference, but influence. A fleeting emotional vibration that matches nothing in your current life, but still feels like yours. This may not be science in the strict sense, but it is science in the poetic one, the kind that lives in the questions, in the observations too subtle for instruments, too human to be plotted. Decoherence explains the silence, but it does not forbid the idea that echoes might remain, because even when two bells have long stopped ringing, the room they rang in remembers. The air still carries their absence, and if your consciousness is not a fixed point, but a kind of field, then perhaps it too remembers, not with thought, not with logic, but with feeling. That feeling, that subtle, unprovable awareness that something else is nearby, just beyond reach, is not necessarily a flaw in your thinking. It might be a truth we haven't learned how to measure yet, in dreams, in déjà vu, in the pull of unnamed emotions. These may be the soft places where the separation thins, not enough to let you pass through, but enough to let you feel, not alone, not singular, just connected, loosely, quietly, like the echo of a bell you never rang but which still seems to know your name. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the world fall just a little out of focus. In that space, not quite awake, not yet asleep, strange things begin to happen. Time stretches, shapes blur. Thoughts form halfway and dissolve before they land. You may hear something, feel something, remember something you never experienced, and then, as quickly as it arrives, it fades. This is the edge of awareness. It's a space we pass through every night, often without remembering. But in that passage, just as consciousness begins to loosen its grip on the physical world, you might find the softest threads of something else, something not quite yours and not quite not. In science, we don't yet have a full vocabulary for this place, but we're beginning to map its terrain. Cognitive neuroscience shows that during these liminal states, especially between wakefulness and REM sleep, the brain begins to reorganize. Logical processing quiets. The default mode network, a system associated with daydreaming self-referential thought and creativity, becomes active. Sensory input declines, but inner imagery rises. You're no longer anchored by your surrounding. You begin to float. And in this float, the boundaries of self can soften. You may dream, but remain aware. You may feel an emotion that doesn't belong to your current life. You may observe a scene with no connection to your memories, but one that feels unmistakably personal. These aren't mistakes. They are features of a mind in motion, not from thought to thought, but from version to version. Earlier, we explored how decoherence explains why parallel timelines don't interfere with each other. But what if awareness doesn't obey the same rules as matter? What if consciousness is not fixed, not pinned in place like a thumbtack on a map, but instead pulses, oscillates, drifts? Not physically, not in space, but in a kind of experiential rhythm. A thought experiment. Imagine awareness as a lantern in a vast dark field. Most of the time it casts light on one path, the version of reality you're living now. But every so often, it flickers. Just briefly. And in that flicker, it illuminates a different trail. You don't walk it, but you see it. You feel what it might have felt like to have gone that way, and then the lantern swings back. You're not unstable, you're not confused, you're simply wide. This doesn't mean you're visiting other timelines. It doesn't mean you've become someone else. It means that your sense of self may be more spacious than linear time allows, that the mind, especially when untethered from immediate stimuli, can briefly drift toward places it once could have gone, or still does, in some distant version of you. We see this most often in dreams, of course, but it can also happen during deep meditation, during sudden moments of creative flow, or even in the strange quiet that follows an emotional shock. Moments when the usual map breaks down and something else moves in, not a replacement, but a shimmer. Some researchers call this cognitive bleed-through, the idea that the brain occasionally cross-connects systems that are normally separate. Language merges with vision, memory merges with imagination. You might for a second feel like you're somewhere else entirely, and it's easy to dismiss this as error. The brain misfiring, making up stories, confusing its circuits. But maybe it's not confusion. Maybe it's sampling, a brief subconscious comparison, a check-in with another emotional blueprint to see what could have been. Awareness, after all, is not just perception, it's attention. And attention is selective. It can shift rapidly, not just across space, but across internal states. And if each version of you exists in a slightly different mental rhythm, perhaps attention is the thread that sometimes slips between them. Imagine it like tuning a radio. Most of the time, you're locked on one station, clear, stable, familiar, but then a flick of static, a whisper of another voice. Not long enough to hear the full message, just long enough to feel that someone else, somewhere nearby, is also speaking. Is that station real? Does it matter? Whether these experiences are quantum in nature or not, they carry meaning. They remind us that awareness is not a fixed, narrow beam. It is a field, a drifting light, and sometimes that light touches more than one possibility. In ancient traditions, this idea shows up in other forms. Shamans speak of travelling between worlds. Mystics describe divine union as a dissolving of the self into something larger. Poets write of thin places where the fabric between realities wears thin. What science calls liminality, others call sacred. You don't need to choose a definition. You can simply listen. To that moment when your thoughts slip out of their usual lines, when you feel someone else's memory in your own chest, when your dreams feel like borrowed stories. These are not errors. These are not signs of confusion. They are edges, the outer rings of your awareness. And on those edges, something ancient hums. Not a fact, not a theory, a song. You don't need to sing it. You're already part of its melody.
Through the room's quiet hum is Mr. Harrow's ledger. I found it hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his shop, tucked away like a guilty secret. Sir Henry Clithering, his broad shoulders filling out his tweed jacket, leaned forward, his eyes sharp with the instincts of a retired Scotland Yard commissioner. A ledger? That's a start. Any names, transactions, something to tie to that scarf, or the smuggling Miss Marple suspects. Raymond flipped open the book, revealing pages crammed with cramped, meticulous handwriting. Columns of numbers danced alongside cryptic notations. CC 12/3, 50 quid. Red meat 15/4, VM. And stranger still, Crimson Club 7/3, VM, 22/6, deliver to mill. The entries were dated over the past year, some smudged, others underlined with a heavy hand. It's not just a grocer's tally, Raymond said, his brow furrowing. These aren't prices for apples or tins of tea. Look at the sums. Hundreds of pounds, some in cash, some marked debt settled. And this Crimson Club keeps popping up. Joyce Lempriere, her artist's fingers stained faintly with charcoal, leaned over to peer at the ledger. Crimson Club. Sounds like something out of a Gothic novel. A secret society? Smugglers hiding behind a fancy name? Her voice carried a mix of scepticism and intrigue, her eyes darting to Miss Marple, who sat quietly, her needles never pausing. Mr. Petherick, the solicitor, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. It could be a code for a legitimate group, charitable, perhaps, or a local guild. But these sums, they're far too large for a village grocer. And the dates? Do they align with anything significant in St. Mary Mead? Dr. Pender, the vicar, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tracing the edge of his teacup. The dates might correspond to village events, fetes, harvests, church bazaars. Harrow was always about, delivering goods, chatting with folk. Could he have been using those as a cover? Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like, flicked up from her knitting. Quite right, Doctor. Pender. People notice so little when they're distracted by a fete or a jumble sale. A grocer's cart, trundling through the lanes, is just part of the scenery. But those entries, she tilted her head, her voice soft but deliberate. They matched the dates of the Women's Institute meetings, the church restoration fundraisers, even the summer fair. Mr. Harrow wasn't just delivering groceries, I suspect. He was moving something else entirely. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Raymond closed the ledger with a snap. Then we need to know what this Crimson Club is, and what's in that cellar of his. The ledger mentions Mill and VM, the old mill perhaps, or someone's initials. Sir Henry nodded, his mind already racing. Harrow's shop has a cellar, doesn't it? Used for storage, I'd wager. If he was...
Forest, where all the other leaves are still suspended in air, just waiting. Simulation, superposition, self. They're not answers, they're harmonies. 3 tones in a larger chord, and when played together, they suggest something about the mystery of you. Not that you're fake, but that you're part of a system far more layered, intelligent and recursive than you've been taught to imagine. In this system, reality is not one thing, it's a sea of entangled questions. You are one of them. And all your versions, the brave one, the cautious one, the grieving one, the one who still believes in things you've forgotten, are not errors in the code, they're reflections. Each time you act, you collapse a bit of the mystery. You move from superposition to shape, from possibility to personhood. But even the paths you don't walk leave traces, faint emotional signatures, longing, déjà vu, the feeling that something is close by, but just out of reach. These may be nothing more than artifacts of how minds work, or they may be the edges of something else. A gentle reminder that the self is not one line through time, but a weave, shimmering in and out of resolution. And perhaps, in those quiet moments, when you feel more than one version of yourself pulling at your heart, it's not confusion, it's music, a soft harmony between who you are almost going to be, and who you're still becoming. Maybe we are simulated, maybe we're quantum, maybe we are stories told by a universe that loves complexity, or maybe we are simply awake inside a dream that no one fully understands, and maybe that's enough. It's easy to imagine that if other versions of you exist, other paths, other selves, other timelines, then you must somehow be incomplete, as if your story is only part of a larger one, and you're missing chapters you were meant to live. But the truth, quiet and steady as a heartbeat, is simpler and kinder than that. You're not lost, you're simply one unfolding among many. The idea that there may be multiple versions of you, each branching off from choices made or not made, doesn't diminish your presence here, it deepens it. It means that your being is not a single thread on a blank canvas, but a rich and growing tapestry, stitched from possibilities. Imagine a great ancient tree. You're standing on one of its limbs, not at the edge, but somewhere between the root and the sky. Behind you, the path winds inward, traced by every step you've taken, And ahead of you, other limbs stretch outward into the distance. You do not see them all. You do not need to. You walk where you are, and the tree in its fullness holds you. Each branch does not cancel the others. Each is a path fully itself. Your branch matters not because it is the only one, but because it is the one you've chosen, or perhaps the one that chose you. And the weight of that branch beneath your feet, the rustling of its leaves, the wind brushing against your skin, these are real, they are enough. In the framework of quantum possibility, it's true. Every decision may spawn new versions of the universe. In one, you turned left instead of right. In another, you stayed when you might have gone. Each of these versions may be real in some sense, their own realities playing out in silence. But you are here. This version of you is living a full, complex, meaningful story. And here's something gentler still. Each version of you carries its own lesson. Some may live lives of great motion, exploration, risk, change. Others may live quietly with routines and stillness. None are superior, none are incomplete. They are reflections of the self shaped by different lights, casting different shadows. You may wonder sometimes which version is the real you, but this is a question built on a misunderstanding. You are not a single, fixed shape trying to find the one right outline. You are more like a garden, a living, changing ecosystem of memory, hope, instinct, and choice. The part of you that regrets is not at war with the part of you that feels peace. The part of you that dreams of other lives doesn't negate the life you're living. It only means you're awake to the richness of what might have been, and what still might come. So when you feel pulled by a path you didn't take, or haunted by a version of you that lingers in the background of thought, remember, that version is not an accusation. It is not a sign that you have failed. It is simply another branch on the tree, one you brushed with your fingertips before climbing this way instead. And maybe, just maybe, that other you is looking back with the same wondering. Maybe they think of you not with envy, but with tenderness, because you too are living a life they didn't get to know. We are taught sometimes to chase certainty, to pick a path and justify it endlessly. But life doesn't require that kind of performance. It asks only that you walk, that you pause now and then to notice the light filtering through the leaves, that you forgive yourself for not being all things at once. You're allowed to feel curious about the other paths. You're even allowed to mourn them gently. But you're not required to carry their weight. You are here. That's what matters. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward." Perhaps that's true not only in time, but across realities. You cannot know what every other version of you has felt or lost or built. But you can know this one. You can be present for it. And in being present, you honour all the others, not by imitating them, but by fully living what is yours to live. So the next time you feel the quiet ache of multiplicity, the sense that there is more of you than fits into this day, let that feeling be an invitation, not a burden. Let it remind you that you are vast, that your inner world holds multitudes, that you're not a glitch in the system, but a garden in bloom. And gardens don't need to grow in every direction at once. They grow where they are planted. They stretch toward the sun they're given. They rest in their own soil, and so can you. You're not lost. You're not broken. You're not unfinished because you didn't take every road. You're one luminous version of a self that could have been many things, and that, in its own way, is beautiful. Sometimes when you wake from a dream it slips away before you can hold it. A whisper of a face, a soundless conversation, a hallway that led somewhere important. All of it dissolves before breakfast. You try to chase it, to hold the feeling in your hands, but it's already gone, like fog burning off in the morning sun. And yet, something stays. Not the image, not the story, but the feeling, the soft echo of something once vivid, now blurred by waking. You can't explain why you woke up with a tightness in your chest, or why the day feels slightly tilted, but you carry it with you, the dream's emotional residue, without its reason. This isn't failure, this is a gift. Because forgetting, that gentle unravelling of detail, may be one of the brain's most compassionate acts. We often think of memory as treasure and forgetting as loss. But forgetting, especially in a life where every moment generates new complexity, is a form of kindness. It is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. In the neuroscience of sleep, we know that memory isn't stored like files in a cabinet. It's dynamic, malleable, and constantly being updated. During REM sleep, the brain not only replays moments from the day, it also reconfigures them. Emotional relevance is reassessed. Connections are rewired. Some memories are softened, others are erased. This process isn't random, it's adaptive. Too much memory paradoxically becomes noise. To live effectively, to respond to the present, to imagine a future, the brain must forget. Not indiscriminately, but wisely. What you remember becomes part of your story. What you forget becomes part of your freedom. And perhaps, if there are parallel versions of you, if your mind brushes against those alternate lives through dreams, intuition, or emotional echoes, then forgetting may be the boundary that keeps you whole. It may be the reason you're able to stay grounded in this life, even as others shimmer quietly just beyond your reach. You don't need to remember every possibility. You don't need to carry the weight of unlived paths, unfinished versions, unspoken words. Memory fades not because it is weak, but because presence is strong. To be truly here, in this moment, in this breath, means letting go of what you can no longer live, not with sorrow but with trust. The mind, in its wisdom, allows some things to blur so that now can come into focus. And if you find yourself mourning the things you've forgotten, the dreams you can't recall, the versions of yourself that feel like ghosts, the decisions that drift farther away with each passing year, know this: the forgetting itself is part of the design. Because if you remembered everything, every branch, every dream, every other you, the present would become unbearable. You would be frozen by options, overwhelmed by meaning. And so, instead, you forget. You remember just enough to feel, to wonder, to grow. Forgetting, in this light, becomes an act of grace. It creates the room you need to breathe, to choose, to become. It is the brain's quiet way of saying, let's start here. And it isn't only the brain. Cultures around the world have long recognized the sacred role of forgetting. In some myths, souls drink from the river Lethe before being born, so they won't carry their old lives into the new. In others, dreams are understood to be messages from the beyond. Powerful, yes, but not to be kept. Only visited. Only felt. Maybe your dreams, your flickers of parallel lives, your sense of something more, maybe they are meant to pass through you like wind through leaves, stirring you, reminding you, and then moving on. Because memory is not the only way to know something. Sometimes presence, full and open, is enough. You're not here to remember every path. You're here to walk one with care. You're not here to hold every version of yourself. You're here to be this one, completely, kindly, just for now. And if, one night, you wake from a dream that felt like a life, and you watch it fall away even as you try to hold it, try this. Smile at the forgetting. Thank it. Trust that the dream gave you what you needed. Not its content, but its colour. Not its plot, but its pulse. And then step into the morning light, knowing that what you forget is not lost. It has simply been folded into the soil of your becoming. What disappears in detail remains in shape. What you let go of still shapes you in softer ways. You're not defined by what you remember. You're shaped by what you feel, what you love, and how you carry the mystery. So let memory fade when it must. Let the branches you cannot see rest in shadow, because you are here, and here, truly, fully, gently, is enough. And now, as the night deepens and thoughts soften, let us return to where we began. Not to a question, but to a quiet understanding. You're not the only version of yourself that could have been, but you are the one who is here now, breathing, thinking, listening, existing in this particular thread of possibility. That is not a flaw, that is a wonder. In the vast branching garden of decisions and consequences, this life, yours, is one path among many. It doesn't matter whether the others are real in a measurable way. It matters that you are, that this you, the one with your memories, your regrets, your hopes, your heartbeat, is present. You may have carried many questions on this journey, about dreams that feel too real, about déjà vu and its quiet pull, about the idea that for every choice you've made, there is another you who chose differently. And it's okay to carry those questions. They are not burdens, they are lanterns, soft and flickering, illuminating the mystery without needing to banish it. Because perhaps the point was never to find a final answer, but to learn how to rest in the presence of questions, to sleep beside them, to trust that even if the cosmos is filled with mirrors, with echoes, with branching threads of self, you do not need to hold them all. You chose this one, or perhaps this one chose you. And though your mind may still wander from time to time, revisiting decisions, rewriting endings, wondering what might have unfolded in another branch, you can always come home to this breath, this moment, this you. Think of yourself not as the only story, but as the version of the story being read aloud right now. There may be others on the shelf, unopened, unwritten, half-remembered, but this is the one with its pages turning under moonlight. This is the one being told in the language of heartbeat and sleep. And what a story it is. A story of choices, not always clear, of paths followed and forgotten, of doors opened in dreams, of strange emotions arriving without cause, of glimpses in mirrors that don't quite reflect back what you expected. A story of wonder and ache and laughter and stillness. A story where sometimes the most important choice was not the one that changed everything, but the one that reminded you that even small things matter. A glance, a breath, a moment of pause, and as you lie here now on the edge of sleep, you're part of something wider than you may ever fully grasp. You're not a glitch in the universe's pattern. You are a reflection, a small shining instance of consciousness, folded gently into a fabric too intricate to map, too delicate to define. And yet, in all that vastness, here you are, this version of you, with your name, your story, your particular arrangement of atoms and memories, is the only one who will ever be quite this way. You are singular, not because others don't exist, but because none of them are exactly this. You are a note in a symphony that will never be played again quite the same way, and that is enough. So as you prepare to drift, not into nothingness but into the quieter rooms of the self, take with you this small comfort. You do not need to explore every path to be complete. You do not need to live all lives to feel alive. You do not need to know which version of you is most true. You are already true. You are a mirror that made a choice. You are a story that is still unfolding. You are a dream the universe had and decided to keep. Sleep now, gently, slowly. Let your thoughts untangle like threads from a woven day. Let your body settle into softness. Let your breath become the rhythm of your rest. The other paths will be there if you ever wish to wander. The other yous will walk their forests. But this you, this moment, is the one who gets to sleep beneath the stars tonight. So rest, little mirror that chose to be. You are enough. And now all the branches grow quiet. You've travelled through many selves tonight, walked beside the flickers of forgotten dreams, stood at the thresholds of unrealized paths, held questions that didn't ask to be answered. And now, gently, we come to the place where they can all be set down. You don't need to carry them into sleep. You don't need to be the version of yourself who understood everything. You don't need to reconcile the past or imagine the infinite. There's no pressure to gather all the scattered possibilities and stitch them into one coherent thread. Because rest does not ask for resolution, it asks for release. All those timelines you might have walked, the ones that echo through déjà vu or slip into your dreams dressed as strangers, they do not need to be known to be honoured. They do not need to be lived to matter. And you do not need to become all your possible selves to be whole. You already are. Even now, as your breath slows and your thoughts loosen, you remain fully you, not because you are fixed, but because you are here. You are not defined by what you remember or what you forgot, not by what you did or didn't choose, but by the simple, beautiful act of being. And that being doesn't need to prove itself. Maybe you'll dream tonight. Maybe you won't. Maybe a fragment of another path will rise up in the shape of a dream, offering you a feeling you didn't know you missed. Or maybe you'll sleep without dreams, drifting peacefully beneath the folds of silence. Both are gifts, both are enough. If you do dream, and the dream feels strange or familiar in a way you can't explain, don't be afraid. It might just be your mind humming with distant music, echoes of versions not forgotten but resting in the soft fields of might have been. Let them drift through. Let them go. And if a version of you appears in sleep, one that feels wiser or braver or more uncertain, greet them, not as a stranger, not as a better self, but as a sibling, a fellow traveller in a story with many roads. Thank them, and return gently to your own. You're not less because you are not all of them. You're not lacking because you do not remember. The universe holds its variations lightly. You can too. At the edge of sleep, identity softens. The voice that narrates your days grows quiet. The memories stop marching. The questions curl into stillness. And in that stillness, something warm remains. Something softer than thought, deeper than certainty. That is you. Not the thinker, not the dreamer, just the presence. The quiet pulse beneath the story. The echo that remains when the rest is gone. You may never know why time feels like it bends in dreams, or why certain moments feel repeated across lives you've never lived. You may never know if consciousness can truly reach across quantum branches, but what you do know, what you feel in your bones, is that there is beauty in not knowing. There is peace in not solving. The universe, in all its complexity, doesn't ask you to figure it out before you sleep. It only asks you to rest, to let your mind unclench, to let your body breathe, to let the unresolved questions drift like stardust into the dark. And as you lie here, quiet, open, resting, know this: you're not lost between realities. You're not tangled in timelines. You're simply resting on a single path, under a sky that holds them all. They will continue with or without your attention, and so will you. You're allowed to let go. Let go of the version of you who should have done more. Let go of the self who regrets, who overthinks, who wonders what would have happened if only. Let them all rest. Tonight, you're not a question. You're not a decision point. You're not a narrative thread needing to make sense. You're just here. And here is soft. Here is still. Here is where you're allowed to sleep without solving, to breathe without reaching, to drift without fear. Because the universe is still unfolding, and so are you. But for now, let that unfolding pause. Let the story exhale. Let everything be held, not in knowledge, but in kindness. The mirror no longer needs to reflect. The paths no longer need to branch. The selves no longer need to shimmer in the periphery. Let them go. Let them sleep. And you, gentle traveller among parallel lives, may sleep too.